after Yud Shvat, and Yud Shvat is the birthday of Project Likutei Sichos, and this is the 6th year into the project, into the movement that Be'ezus Hashem will continue to sweep the world. We're doing Yisro Beis, and we have a few Mazel Tovs to share. Chaisara Marazav had a great grandson. Her daughter, Rivky Brickman, had a grandson born to Isser and Chani Brickman, Mazel Tov. And Ruth Bell had a new granddaughter, Yael Vittel, just named, born to her son, Maisha, and daughter-in-law, Avigail. And tonight is the wedding of Devari Wilhelm's daughter. So Mazel Tov to everybody, and just Yiddische Chasidische Nachas, Gesundheit and Freiligkeit, and let's keep sharing Simchas only. Yisro Beis, Aleph. It's a Rashi Sicha, so why don't we go into the pasuk and the Rashi first, and then we'll go into the Sicha. So it's Perek Chaf 20, chapter 20, pasuk Beis, verse 2. And the pasuk reads, Anechi Hashem Elokecha, I am God your God, Asher Hitesicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, Mibeis Avadim, from the house of slaves. And Rashi says on the words, Asher Hitesicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, Kedai hi ha'hitzah, the act of bringing you out is sufficient, Shetiyu mishubadim li, to make you subservient to me. Davar acher. Then Rashi gives us two more teachings on these words. An alternate explanation. Lafisha nigla bayam kegibar milchama, v'nigla kan kezakin mali rachamim. Since Hashem had revealed himself at the Yamsuf, at the sea of reeds, as one who is powerful at war, and reveals himself here as an elderly being full of compassion. Shenemar, as it says, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael b'tachas raglav kemas elivnas hasapir. They saw a vision of the God of Israel, and under his feet there was something like brickwork of sapphire. Zu haisa lefana b'shas hashibut. This was what was before him at the time of the enslavement in Egypt. Uche'etzem hashemayim. It was like the essence of the heavens. Kishen nigalu, once they were redeemed. Ha'el vani mishtane b'marais. Therefore, since I changed appearances, al toimu shtei rishuyas hein. I don't want you to think that there are two dominions, that there's two gods, chas v'chalila. And therefore, Hashem says, Anaychi hu asher etzicha mitzrayim. I am the same one who brought you out of the land of Egypt, v'alayam, and I was with you at the Sea of Reeds. That's the second explanation. The third explanation, davar acher, on the words asher ha'etzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, lefi shahayu shaimin kailes harbe, because at Matan Torah they heard many sounds. Shen ne'emar, as it says, es hakailes, the people saw. That's another, that's iconic sicha. Rayin es hanishma, they saw the sounds. What are the sounds? One way of understanding it, kailais boin me'arba ruchais, that the sounds came from all four directions, or shamayim, min haaretz, as well as from heaven and earth. I think it's called surround sound. So the Eibusha says again, al toimru rishuyas harbehain. I want to make sure you don't think that there are many deities, that there are many dominions here. There's only one God. V'lama amar l'shoin yachid, and why, in fact, does it say in the singular form, Elokecha, your God? So this is almost like a fourth explanation. Litem pischem pele Moshe, in order to give an opening to Moshe, l'lamed sanegoria b'maseh egel, to present a case in defense of Bnei Yisrael after the act of the golden calf. V'zeh she'amar, and this is what is meant when he said, Lama Hashem yechara abcha ba'mecha. Why, God, should you be angry at your nation? Lo lahem tivisa. It was not to them that you commanded lo yeh lecha elokim acherim, that they should not have any other gods. Ela li levadi. You said Anoichi Hashem Elokecha in the singular. So what do you want from the Jews? You were telling me that I am your God. Okay, so they did something that wasn't right, but you hadn't told them not to do that. You said in the singular to me. That's Rashi. As you could see, it's quite a long Rashi. And the Rebbe now looks at this Rashi in his singular way and analyzes what is Rashi's question and what is Rashi teaching here. Here we go. Aleph. In his commentary on the words, I am Hashem, your God, that took you out of the land of Egypt. Hetik Rashi as Atevos, Rashi cites the words from the verse, Asher Hitzesicha Eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt, U Perish, and his first commentary is, Kedaihi HaHitza'a Shetiyu Mishubadim Li. It's sufficient for you to subserviate yourselves, to subjugate yourselves to me, because I took you out of Egypt. And after this, Rashi follows with two additional commentary that we will treat further on in the fifth portion of the Sikha. But first, what concerns the Rebbe here is Mahu HaKoishi B'divrei HaKosov Sheba Rashi Liyashe B'Perushay. Ma Kosha L'Rashi. What is the question? What is bothering Rashi? It seems like a perfectly benign verse, if there's such a thing. Doesn't seem to be anything problematic. What is Rashi? What's bothering Rashi? HaMizrahi Bir, so one of the super commentaries on Rashi, the Mizrahi explains, V'chein Kasvu Oid Mefarshim, and other commentaries converge on the same explanation. Shasha'elahi, that the question is Lama Tala Elekusoi Biatias Mitzrayim. Why does God make his being the deity of the Jewish people contingent on taking them out of Egypt? Va'amar, and he says in this verse, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am God, your God, Asher Hitzesicha, who took you out of Egypt. V'loi Amar, and he doesn't, for instance, say Asher Barasi Shemayim Ba'aretz, who created. Thank you. I don't know what happened there. He doesn't say, I am God, your God, who created heaven and earth. In other words, why is it about taking them out of Egypt? Balkach metaretz Rashi. And so to answer this question, Rashi explains, Sha'al yedei ha'hitzah mi'mitzrayim miyosem lahem avodim, by taking them out of Egypt, where they were subjugated, where they were slaves, zacha bahem liyos mishubadim loy v'yeh. So God merits, he kind of gets the reward, as it were, that Jews should subserviate themselves to him, and he should be their God. Okay, that's the way. I don't know why that keeps happening, but I will try to pay attention and reverse that. So that's the way the Mizrahi explains what Rashi's difficulty is and why Rashi answers the way he does. But seemingly, but this doesn't seem exactly correct. It's not computing. Al pipshuta shel mikra, if you're going according to the pshat, the simple explanation, milichatchila ein kol makom l'she'ela lama le'nemar shebarasi shemayim va'aretz. From the perspective of pshat, from the very beginning, there doesn't seem to be a question. There's no question as to why God doesn't say, I am your God who created heaven and earth. Sharei divrei hakasuv kan boim kehemshach u'kutam lo'noichi Hashem elekecha. Because it seems that the words Asher Hitzesicha Meretz Mitzrayim, the words I took you out of Egypt, come to qualify God's statement, I am God, your God, not the God of heaven and earth, not the universal God, your God. So, what was specific to the Jewish people? I took you out of Egypt. Dahainu meaning, Hashem hu Elokehem shel b'nei Yisrael. It's coming to explain why God is the God of the Jewish people. V'im kain, and if so, hayehech l'tzayin inyan hashayach la'am Yisrael b'vad. And so, if this is what it's about, saying I am specifically your God as opposed to the God of all the peoples of the universe, then it has to reference something that's unique to the Jewish people. Shebeglalav nivdalim b'nei Yisrael mikol ha'olam kulei. There has to be a factor that distinguishes the Jewish people from the rest of the world. V'hatam shemibein yonim akshurim l'am Yisrael nivchar inyan zed dafka. And now we could ask, okay, we understand that Hashem is introducing himself as our God uniquely. So to bolster that, he is going to reference something that happened to us specifically. And why choose this as opposed to other things that happened to the Jews specifically? Why nifchar inyan zadafka heitzesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim? Why cherry pick or choose this specifically? Move on bepashtos. That's understood simply. Ki ha'isa zu geulas am Yisrael asher hevila lemamad har Sinai. Because it was this event, taking them out of Egypt, that brought them to Sinai. And that is where we became distinguished. We became Hashem's Am Segula, Hashem's beloved nation. So everything really flows from taking us out of Egypt. So again, we're back to square one, which is, what's the question? Why is Rashi even paying attention? Never mind spilling so much ink. But why is he even blinking? This seems very simple. But the Rebbe says, no, Hasha'ela av gedola mizu. There's even a bigger question as to why Rashi is all over this. And what's the question? Inyan zeh, this idea, this concept, Shetias Mitzrayim hiatam lekach shanoich Hashem lekecha, that that taking us out of Egypt is the reason that Hashem is our God. Ubesignan acher, or to say this slightly different stylistically, Shetias Mitzrayim hisekidei sham Yisrael yikablu aleim es hakadosh baruch hu lelokav v'yavdu eisai. That taking the Jews out of Egypt was in order that the Jews should take upon themselves God as a God and that they should serve him. Ne'emak far le'il. This theme has already been trotted out earlier. V'af kama pa'amim, not just once, but a number of times. Take it for Parsha Shemais. We find this at the very beginning of Parag Gimel of the Chumash Shemais. It says, Ne'emar, V'yitziachas ha'am mitzrayim ta'avdun es halekim halahar hazeh. Immediately, Hashem says, when you take the Jews out of Egypt, what's the agenda? That they should serve God on this mountain. Al derazeh b'tchilas parshas ve'era. And then we have at the beginning of Parshas Ve'era, Lachein Emor Levnei Yisrael, therefore say to the Jews, I will take you out from beneath the suffering that is Egypt. I will take you to me as a nation, and I will be a God to you, and you will know, Hashem I am God, your God, that took you out from beneath the subjugation to Egypt. So we know this. So what's the chiddush here that Rashi has to explain anything at all? There's nothing new, it seems. Yisera mizu, even more so, the parsha seinu gufa, in our own parsha, the parsha of this week. Bichsuvim ha'iskim b'hachonas l'matan Torah, in the psukim that deal with the preparation to receiving the Torah, ne'emar, it says in our parsha, in the last parak Yutes, psukim dalet tavav, atem re'isem asher asisi leMitzrayim ve'eseschem, you saw what I did in Mitzrayim, and I lifted you up, etc. That brought you to me. Shemaya tishmu b'koili u'shmartam esbrisi. You should listen to my voice. You should hearken unto my voice. You should keep my covenant. Va'atem tiyuli, and you will be to me. Amlachas Kayanim v'Goy Kadosh, you're going to be a nation of priests, you're going to be a holy nation. V'im kain, and if so, if this theme has been hammered home so many times already, ain't a move on, it's just not understood. Mahu hakashi bepasuk zeh dafka. What is the difficulty in this verse specifically? Shekedei liyashvoi, in order to reconcile the difficulty, hutzrach Rashi lefarish kan v'loy le'il kedai hi haitzah. Only over here does Rashi comment that it's sufficient for you to subjugate yourself to me simply because I took you out of Egypt. In other words, why does Rashi feel compelled to say that here when this theme has been, hammered home time and time again, that you will be my people because I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt, and therefore you will be my people. So why here explain the correlation or explain the calculus? We are now beginning Se'iv Beis, the second part of the Sikha. In the second part, the Rebbe says, separate from the overarching question, there are a number of subtleties that need to be explained and addressed. Kain yeshnam kama diyukim b'lashon Rashi. There are a number of specific things that the Rebbe wants to address in the words of the Rashi. B'pashto, simply speaking, divrei Rashi, the words of Rashi, shetiyu mishubadim li, that you should subserviate yourselves to me, that you should subjugate yourselves to me, heim perush lahascholas hapasuk. They seem to be a comment on the beginning of the pasuk, which is Anochi Hashem Elekecha. I am your God. B'lashon har'em hanal, like Rebbe Yoam Mizrahi, a super commentary on Rashi, says in his words, Mishubadim loy bi'elekeim. They are subjugated to him, and he will be their God. In other words, here one of the axiomatic rules that the Rebbe taught about how to read Rashi is that the Dibor HaMaschil, the words that Rashi takes out of the pasuk and bolds, as it were, to give us his commentary, are actually part of his commentary. Okay, most people just look at that as a placeholder, as a way of understanding what we should be looking at. But the Rebbe taught that Rashi was exquisitely careful with which words and what he included and what he didn't include. So here the Rebbe is saying it would seem that what Rashi is commenting on should really be on the words Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and not on the words Asher Hitzisicham Eretz Mitzrayim. Because the words Asher Hitzisicham Eretz Mitzrayim, I took you out of Egypt, Hu Hatam Lekach Shanochi Hashem Elokecha. Seemingly, that's the reason I'm your God. In other words, that seems to be the logic in this verse. I am God, your God, who took you out of Egypt. I am God, your God, because I took you out of Egypt. Kiloimar, that is to say, after I took you out of Egypt, so therefore you became subjugated to Hashem. You became my indentured slaves. Al derech mashenemer b'seif parsha shlach, like what we see is said at the end of parsha shlach, ubekama ksuv macherim, and in other psukim, ani Hashem Elokechem, asher etzisicha eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim liyos lachem lalakim. I am God, your God, who took you out of Egypt in order to be your God. Ukaperish Rashi, and like Rashi says, al minas came padisi eschem. It is for this reason that I freed you. It was on that condition that I freed you. But now it's not understood. Aleph. Lama loyhetik Rashi b'dibar maschil gamas atevas anochi Hashem l'kecha. She'oisan piresh behemshach devarav. Why doesn't he include the words, I am God, your God, which seem to be the words that he is actually commenting on? Those seem to be the words that he is paying attention to. The second question on the specific words of Rashi, deruba shel hamikoimes. In the majority of places, shehiskir Rashi teichen zeh, that Rashi speaks to this content, sheyitzias Mitzrayim ha'isal menashe b'nei Yisrael yikablu alemis hakadosh baruch hu lelakim, that the leave taking from Egypt was on the condition that Bnei Yisrael should take upon themselves God as their God. Lashon Rashi, who Rashi uses very specific terminology. He says al minas, in order, al minas kain, on this condition, padisi, I freed you, or something like that. The lama kan, but why here? Nakat Rashi aloshin kidai ha'itza. It's sufficient. It's fear that because I took you out, you should subjugate yourself to me. So 2 questions so far. Seemingly, the words that should be highlighted, the Dibra Maskil, should be Anochi Hashem Elokecha. That's not what Rashi does. Second, in most places where Rashi teaches the content of what he seems to be teaching here, he uses different terminology. He says, I took you out of Egypt on the condition, you were freed on the condition that I should be your God. But here he says differently. Rashi says, it's almost like God is saying, I earned it. It's sufficient. The fact that I took you out is sufficient that you should subjugate yourself to me. Gimel, the third question. We would think that Rashi would have given us the same idea in different terminology that's more aligned with the words in the pasuk. The words in the verse say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God your God. So we would think that Rashi would have responded symmetrically and said, Kedai, it's sufficient that I took you out of Egypt, so it's sufficient that Shitikablu Elikusi, that you should accept my divinity upon you. But Rashi doesn't say that. He says, it's sufficient, I took you out of Egypt, that you should subjugate yourself to me. Or, Keloshen Rashi b'makam acher, the Rebbe says, or like Rashi has said elsewhere, shetekablu malchusi, that you should accept my sovereignty. But what is this? The lama shina Rashi meloshen hakasov. Why did Rashi change or divert from the terminology that's being used in the verse? The nakat bitui v'inyan chadash, and he cites a different term, which really opens up. It's because words are very, very important. So it opens up different imagery. But really what the Rebbe is going to teach is it opens up a completely different paradigm. This is not just about accepting my sovereignty. It's about you subjugating yourself to me, and the Rebbe is going to parse the difference. Now, l'chayra, seemingly, yesh l'taretz, we should explain sh'hayisoid l'loshen Rashi husiyim hakosov mi beis avodim, that Rashi is basing what he's saying and how he's saying it on the end of the pasuk where it says, I took you out of the house of slaves. Therefore, kedai hi hataitza, the act of bringing you out is sufficient. Shebnei Yisrael yiyu avdei Hashem, that Bnei Yisrael should be servants of God. In other words, I took you out of servitude to the Egyptians, and this is sufficient that you should subserviate yourself to me. You should be my slaves. Al derech masha nemar, like it says in Parshas Bahar, avodai heim, they are my slaves. Asher aitesi eisam eretz Mitzrayim, and I took them out of Egypt. But the Rebbe says that is not enough. Aval ein zeh tiretz maspik. This is not enough of an explanation to say that Rashi is aligning his perush and is using this specific terminology because of what comes later in the pasuk. It's not enough because Aleph, Lashon Rashi Adayin Eina Misyasheves Lagamre. Even if you want to say that he's channeling the last words or the later words in the pasuk, it's still not reconciling the question. Sharei imkain, because if this was the reason why he says mishubadim haya loy loymar, then he should have said kalosh nakasav. He should actually have used the same terminology of the pasuk. Kedai chule shetiyu avodai. It's sufficient that I took you out of. That's sufficient enough reason you should be my slaves. But he doesn't say that. V'lama shina v'kasav mishubadim. He changes and he doesn't talk about slavery, he talks about subjugation. And again, the Rebbe is going to explain the difference, which seems like just semantics, but it's not. Yes, in a lot of places, kedai means it's worthwhile, etc. But I'm going according to the Mitzuda Chumash and the Chayenu. I looked it up in a few places because I was also struggling with this, and it seems to be that the consensus is that kedai hi haitza means that the act of bringing you out is sufficient, is enough for you to subjugate yourself to me. Bays, the second reason why Rashi diverting from the terminology in the pasuk, and perhaps saying that that's because of the last two words in the pasuk, mibeis avadim, why that's not enough. The Rebbe says va'oid ve'ikar, more, and the main reason it's not enough is because b'dibor hamaschil zeh hetik Rashi es hatevos asher hoytesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim bilvat, because in the dibor hamaschil, in the words that Rashi chose to comment on, that he highlights, he highlighted the words who took you out of Egypt, bilvat. And those are the only words he highlights. In other words, if Rashi was channeling the words Beis Havadim, he would have put that in the Dibra Maschil. And the Rebbe says, Vafilu loy ramaz elav b'hisafas v'goymer. And Rashi doesn't even allude to it by adding etc. Umuvan mizeh, so it's understood from this that this idea that Rashi is teaching, that it's that my taking you out of Egypt is sufficient reason for you to subjugate yourself to me. Lamad Rashi extracted this loy mimasher nemar mi beis avodim. His emphasis is not on the fact that at the end of the pasuk it says from the house of slaves, ella, but rather mitoich hatevos, from the very words that he highlighted, which are asher hetesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim gufa, from that very phrase, who took you out of the land of Egypt. Ubefrat, and especially shafilu beperushay, even in his commentary, kasav Rashi bestam, Rashi simply writes, kedai hi haitzah, it's sufficient that I took you out. And Rashi doesn't say, ha haitzah mi beis avadim, that it took you out from the house of slavery. So, again, to review, the Rebbe's question is, what is the news flash in this pasuk that causes Rashi to give us so much commentary? Seemingly, on the face of it, the pasuk's just telling us something we've had before, we'll have again. And why does Rashi feel compelled to comment on this, and in such elongated manner? And specifically, it seems that Rashi's commentary is prompted by and comes out of the words Anochi Hashem Elikecha. I'm sorry, Asher Hetzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. And Rebbe says that that's significant, and that is going to give us the clue as to what Rashi really wants to teach us here. And all of the questions that come after that are really looking at the specific words over and over and over again to hammer home the same point, that there's something specific, there's something novel that Rashi is trying to teach here. Gimel. V'yesh loymar habir b'chol zeh. And we might say that the explanation in all of this is, and the answer to all of the subsidiary specificities is the following. Hasha'ela b'divrei hakosov. The real question in the words of the verse, Asher ha'itzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt, he loy madua tala hakosov zeh sha'anochi Hashem Elokecha b'kach she'itzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. The question is not, why does it seem that God is making his sovereignty over the Jews as their God contingent on taking them out of Egypt? The Rebbe says, no. Ela lahefach. The question is the opposite. My kamashmalon. What is the pasuk teaching us that we don't already know? That's what's bothering Rashi. The redundancy of it all. What is this? We know that every word is counted and measured. So what are we learning here? And let's not forget, this is the first pasuk in the Seres HaDibros. I mean, this is the preamble to the most important message that the Eibusher is sending to the Jews and to the entire world. So what's bothering Rashi is, okay, tell me something I don't know. What's the purpose here? Ka'amora said, B'nai Yisrael yodu mikfar shematan Torah ta'avdunus Elokim hu ha'tachlis shel yetzias Mitzrayim. The Jews knew this already. They knew that serving God was the goal of leaving Mitzrayim. The Yisrael came, and even more. As Zois Tiba Kadosh Baruch Hu limsar levnei Yisrael b'mei ha'chadal matan Torah canal, and this is what Hashem commanded Moshe to give over to the Jews in the days of preparation for Matan Torah, as stated above. And here are some of those words. Atem re'isem asher asisi leMitzrayim. The Rebbe stated before, he's stating again, you saw what I did to Egypt, Esaschem, and I carried you, Va'avi eschem elai, I brought you to me, Shamoya tishmu b'koili ushmartem as brisi. So now I want you to listen, to hearken unto my voice, to keep the covenant, and you will be Tiyuli mamleches kohenim v'goy kadosh. You'll be to me a nation of priests, a holy nation. B'hayil b'kach. So that being so, that they already know this, my kamashmilon. What is being taught to us here? Really? Is that what we're supposed to learn from this pasuk? Something that we've heard over and over and over again? Ulefichach nakat Rashi, and therefore Rashi cites shehahemshach asher hotzisicham eretz Mitzrayim, that those words, who took you out of the land of Egypt, this is not the reason that I am your God. This is not an explanation for why I am your God. Elazehu inyan bifnei atzmai. But these words, rather than understanding them as they have been understood previously, that this is the reason that I'm your God, or this is the reason that you have to be my people because I took you out of Egypt. No. Rashi's teaching us, says the Rebbe, that the words Asher Hitzesicham Eretz Mitzrayim is a new concept. It's a novel concept, and it's a self-standing concept. Inyan Chodosh. There's a novelty here. Kedaihi ha'itza shetiyu mishubadimli. Okay, remember in the previous section of the Sikha, the Rebbe asked why this particular terminology that you should subjugate yourself to me. And the Rebbe says that is what is the real memo. What's the real announcement in this pasuk? It's all in the word mishubad. How so? Anoichi Hashem Elokecha Perushai. How do we understand the words, I am God your God? Kabbalas Malchusai, accepting Hashem's sovereignty, accepting Hashem's dominion. Hainu, meaning, Sha'adam Mekabel Olav as HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kishalit Umelech. The person accepts upon themselves God as their their despot or their help me out here, someone, Shalit, their leader and their king. Umamela, and therefore, Mekabel olav l'kayim is called tzivuyev, and they accept upon themselves to observe all the commandments. Va'al zeh ha'yisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu oid inyan. But now the Eibishter, right at the very beginning, right at the top of the Ten Commandments, is adding a new facet, a new strata, a new dimension in the relationship. It's not just that I am your leader and I am your king, and you have to accept upon yourself all my commandments. Ein dai be'inyan kabbalas malchus shamayim. It's not enough that you should accept the yoke of heaven. That leads the kabbalas all mitzvahs lekiyum gzeirosav, and when you accept the ol malchus shamayim, that leads to keeping the yoke of the mitzvahs and to observing all of the edicts. No, there's something more that I want for you. Ella al b'nei Yisrael liyos mishubadim li. What Hashem says I'm looking for is that you should subserviate yourself to me. Mishubadim legamre la Hashem. You should be completely subservient, completely subjugated. What's the difference? Kabbalas malchus eina sheleles escheirus chayev hapratim. Saying that you accept sovereignty upon you doesn't obviate, it doesn't cancel out freedom in your private moments, in your private life. In chayev hapratim va'ishiyim shala adam, in the private moments of the person. Ve'ein mashmu'usa ela kiyum hanyanim hamisuyamim shemitzav hamelech lasos. What it does imply is that a person has to conform with the specific things that the king commands. Hein bekum va'ase, lasos mashatziva, both in the positive commandments, in the get up and go and do mitzvahs aseh, ve'hein b'shei val tasa, and both in the negative commandments, where God says, don't do. Lihimana milasos sha'asar melech, where you prevent yourself from doing something that God doesn't want, or the king doesn't want. So just like this would be what it means to accept the sovereignty of a human king upon you, so it is with God. That the content of what it means to be Mikabel Ol Malchus Shamayim is that you take upon yourself to observe all the mitzvahs and all the edicts of the king. That's what it means to be Mikabel Ol Malchus Shamayim. That's what it means if it would have said that you take upon yourself to be my slaves. Masha enkein mishubadim li. In contradistinction, the word that Rashi uses here is that you will be subjugated to me, or you'll be subservient to me. The implication here is all-encompassing. Perushai, what it means is, she'adam mi Yisrael einoi metzius ha'emedes la'atzma, that a Jew is never their own existence. We're not independent contractors. Ein loy kol cherus mishaloi. We have no personal freedom. Elahu mishubad kol kuloi im kol asher loy uvechol ma'asav laHashem. But we are all in with everything that we have and with every single one of our actions. We're all in. We're all Hashem's. V'zehu shediik Rashi v'kasov kedai hi ha'itza v'lo yalmenos. And this is why Rashi carefully says it was sufficient. It's appropriate that you should subjugate yourself because I took you out, but not I took you out in order that you should be my people. Lashon al minas. When would Rashi use the term on the condition or for the purpose? Lashon almanas nekid Rashi b'mkayme shenemru because of shnei inyanim asher echad hu t'nai l'zulasai. Rashi uses a terminology when there are two things being discussed, and one is the reason for the other. Kemai, like, Ani Hashem Elikechem asher hitzisi eschem, I am God your God, who took you out of Egypt, liyos lachem lelikim, to be for you a God. Masha enkein, benidun didan, but in contradistinction, in this case, hadrisha, what's being asked of us is Tiyu mishubadim li aliba de Rashi. The way Rashi understands it, what's being asked of us is more than just being pedestrian slaves or the people of. And it's eina t'nai, and it's not a condition, elahi ha-perush. It's the definition, v'ha-mechuvan, and the intention of the words, asher hitesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt. Of those words itself, Masha kidai b'ha'itzahu, shehi kaleles b'teicha, inyan zeh shebnei Yisrael yu mishabadim li. According to Rashi, what the Torah is saying, what's novel here, the reason that this verse exists at all, is because the words Asher hitesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took you, who took you out of the land of Egypt, is teaching that not because I took you out, but the definition of taking you out is that you should be subjugated to me completely. That it's all encompassing, that there are no aspects of your persona, there are no aspects of your life that remain outside of this rubric. Dalit. Al Pize Yuvan, so based on what the Rebbe has explained now, what is Rashi's question, which is why does this pasuk exist at all? What is Rashi's answer? That this is a novel teaching, that this is a novel mandate. I don't just want to be telling you to jump and you ask how high. I want you to understand that you and I are one thing, that you're absorbed in me, that it's not like religion is a compartment. It's not like it's a draw in the overall dresser of life. It is who you are, all of you. And al pizeh yuvan gamatam, and now based on this, we'll understand the reason. Shaloi hetik Rashi b'dibur maschil simakosam beis avodim, and that's why Rashi does not cite from the house of slaves in his dibur maschil. Va'afilu ramas ala b'tevas v'goyim. He doesn't even allude to it by saying etc., as he sometimes does. Hachiluk bein haloshon mishubadim li leloshen avdus stamhu, because there's a difference between saying you're subjugated to me, you're subservient to me, and using the term of slavery in a pedestrian way. Because bahaskaras evet stam, when you mention the paradigm of a slave, adayan ein mudgeshes shlilas hacheres, it doesn't obviate any personal freedom. It doesn't knock that out of the park. It doesn't take it out of the equation. Shekain, because although it's true, according to Torah, that a slave is not an independent existence, and he's actually the asset of his owner, chattel. He's not like a person you hire hourly and you give them wages to do a certain thing around your house. A slave is a different rubric. It is a different category. Mikol makim, but still and all, Oil ha'avdus bo l'dei biter be'ikar b'malacha shu oisa avor adin. But when does this express itself? When does this relationship express itself? When the slave is doing what the master needs. Umemela, and therefore, bismane achilasai, shinasai v'chulei. But when the slave is eating, when the slave is sleeping, when the slave has free time, einhu magish kol kachas ola adain. So he's not feeling the yoke of his master. And it could be a possibility that there's a certain amount of time that the master doesn't need the slave's service. And therefore, there's the possibility of his resting. He has off. He's off duty. Kiloimar, that is to say, ha'eved eina mechuyev lachzor achar asiyas melachos avor adin. A slave is not obligated to be searching for work to do for his master. His master gives him a task list. There are certain things that are expected. If he finishes more quickly, more free time. But he's not obligated every moment of his life to be looking for something else to do. Masha ein kein haloshem mishubadim. The Rebbe says, but the term that Rashi uses here, which earlier the Rebbe showed that it's not a term that was used in other places, this term of being subservient or subjugated, madgisha eshibud ha'eved la'adonai ba'oifen shel oil timidi. It underscores a relationship of subservience to a master that is constant and uninterrupted. Al derech haloshen shibud b'shaychus l'mamain. Like, for instance, when you use this term related to monetary issues. She'hamamain nase mishubad v'kavul leval ha'choiv. Like, for instance, this idea of putting a lien on your property, that the lender lended money to, the lender took money from somebody, and now that money is owed and is constantly a lien on their property. So if they don't pay off, the person who lent the money will just take the property. In other words, there's a constancy, there's a shibud that accompanies this kind of arrangement. When a person loans money from the loaner, he's constantly feeling that relationship. He's constantly feeling that that yoke, because he knows if he can't pay back, his farm will go, his homestead will go, etc., etc. He feels it. Ad shafilu bismanim she'ena adam matil alav kol malacha margish ha'eved be'etzem mitzyusei es shibudoi la'adain. Even during the times that in this paradigm of mishubadim, even in the times where there is no task that the master needs, but the slave still feels his subservience in uninterrupted fashion. V'zehu diuk lashon Rashi shetiu mishubadim li, v'lo shetiu avodai ukiyetze b'zeh. And therefore Rashi uses this anomalous term, mishubadim, you shall be subservient to me, and not you will be my servants, you will be my slaves. The fact that Matan Torah brought to the situation that Bnei Yisrael should be the servants of God, in conventional understanding of servants, that's already included in the words Elokecha, I am your God, you are my subject. But after we understand that God is our ruler, thank you, Chaya, and our king, Hare anu beba'alusai, We are under his ownership. We are under his dominion. Like it says, "V'lakachti eschem li la'am," I am going to take you to me as a nation. V'hayisi lochem la'lokim, and I'm going to be your God. U'memela, and therefore, yesh lihishamaloi. We have to listen to him, la'avdoi, and we have to serve him. Ka'avoidas eved la'adainai, like a servant serves the master. Masha enkein, but in contradistinction, in the words Sicham Eretz Misrayim, in the words, I took you out of the land of Egypt, Noisef Oid Inyan. In those words is nestled another layer, another concept. Kedaihi ha'hitzah shetiyu mishabodim li. That the act of bringing you out was sufficient, that you should be completely subservient to me, where no aspect of your time or your personhood at all is not included in this relationship. Although the condition for going out of Mitzrayim is only that we should become God's nation, and that could be understood using the paradigm of a king and a nation or a people. Mikol Makim, but still in all, what the Eibusher wants is more. I took you out, and in taking you out, that is enough of a reason, it's sufficient, that you should have a completely different relationship with me, no holds barred. There's nothing that's not included in this. Because what And now here the Rebbe is saying, how do you see this in the words Asher Hitzesicham Eretz Mitzrayim? Because what was the experience of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim? They were not just slaves, avodim stam. They were not just like other slave in a house of slavery. They were ba'ofen shel shibud. They were subserviated. They were subjugated completely, utterly. It was avodas perach. It was back-breaking, psyche-breaking work. And then on top of that, it became more and more difficult. Lamaila mimidida. It broke all metrics. It transcended all measure. On a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of servitude, it was 100 or 1,000,000. Lefichach, therefore, kedai haitzah zum eretz Mitzrayim shetiyu lo yavadim stam ela mishubadim. Therefore, it's sufficient that I take you out of that anomalous type of subjugation that far transcended any description of conventional slavery, domestic help, whatever you want to call it. You were completely subjugated. Now this is sufficient that you should be completely subjugated to me. Hey, al pi bir zeh beperish Rashi. So based on this explanation of what Rashi is doing in this pasuk, that the words after Ani Hashem Elokecha, the next words, who took you out of the land of Egypt, what Rashi is coming to teach us is the novelty here is that who took you out of Egypt is not the reason that I'm your God. It's a separate statement. It's inyan chadash. Yuvan gam hatam shalachri perish leh. Now in a position to understand why after this, that Rashi explains on the words Asher Tesicham Eretz Mitzrayim, Hevi Rashi shnei perushim noisafim. Then Rashi brings 2 additional explanations. V'zeh l'shaynai. And this is the terminology of Rashi. Davar acher, another thing. Lefisha nigla biyam kegibor milchama, because Hashem appeared to them at the Yam Suf like a warrior. V'nigla kan kazoke moli rachamim, and here Hashem appears as a compassionate elder. Shenamar b'tachas ragla libna sapir, etc. So therefore, so because Hashem says, I changed the way I present it to you, I need to disabuse you of thinking that there are two dominating forces, that there are two deities, God forbid. Therefore, Hashem says, Anoichi hu asher hatzisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the same one that took you out of Mitzrayim. I'm the same one that was al hayam, that was at sea. Davar acher. And then, continuing, another thing. Lefisha hayu shoimin kailas harbe, because they heard many sounds. It was coming from all four directions, and from heaven and earth, above and below. Again, al toimer rishuyas harbehein. Don't say that there are a lot of dominions or deities. Rashi, and then afterwards, Rashi also writes, "V'lama Amar Lashon Yachid Elekecha." And why does Hashem say, "I am God, your God," in the singular? Litain Pischapel Moshe, to give Moshe an opening, to give Moshe a alibi. The Lamed Sanagoria B'Masa Egel. He should be able to protect or advocate for the Jews after the Egel, that lo lahem tzivisa, lo yilachem elokim acherim. Moshe should be able to say, you never commanded them that they shouldn't have other gods. Elali levati, you said to me, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God. Now, ulach ayra tambua. Seemingly, this is strange. Halei Rashi mefarish pshut mikra, right? Rashi tells us constantly that he comes to teach us the pshat, the simple explanation. So what was missing in his very first commentary? Once the Rebbe explains what Rashi was teaching in the very first thing, that you should be mishubadim, and that's a novel level in our relationship with Hashem. And that the pasuk is not saying, I am your God because I took you out of Egypt, but rather, I am your God in a way of subjugation, complete subjugation, like you experienced in Egypt. Okay, so now, once we got that, what's missing? Why does Rashi trot out these additional explanations that seem to be very far from the simple explanation of the pasuk? And they're far from the simple explanation, hein mitzat toichnam haklali, both in a global, systemic, conceptual way. That Rashi feels compelled to say that Hashem needs to disabuse the Jews of believing that there's more than one God. The Rebbe says, la'achari iyas kol hanisim b'Mitzrayim v'al hayam v'amdem b'ma'amid har Sinai yet tzorech lishlol mebnei Yisrael es hatam sheshtei harbei rishuyas hein. Is it conceivable to believe that after everything that the Jews experienced, all the miracles they saw in Egypt, all the miracles they saw at the Yam Suf, and now they're standing at Har Sinai, and now God feels compelled to say to them, just making sure you know, there's just one of me? It's difficult. And in brackets, the Rebbe says, and seemingly, even the fact that Hashem appeared in different guise, in a different persona, if we could say this, once as the warrior, once as the kindly and compassionate elder, that wouldn't be enough of a reason that the Jews should mistake that. Because this is something so simple to understand. And we see this all the time with human beings. Shamara haponim al kaponim, that at least the face of people, mishtana behetem lepula hanasis, can change in conformity with what you're doing. A person is going to have a different guise. They're going to present differently when they're going out to war or when they're walking an old lady across the street. I mean, this is not rocket science. We understand that. We have different aspects of our persona. They're going to come out at different times based on what we're involved in. And how much more so it seems inconceivable that Hashem should have to obviate the belief that there's more than one deity because they were hearing sounds coming from different directions. Kasher, because Aleph Mikol Koiles Harbe, because all of these voices, Nishmu Oisam Hadiborim, they heard the same words, they heard the same message. So if anything, this just amplifies the message and amplifies the fact that it's all coming from one source. And just how miraculous that one source is. Like the Mefarshim, the Midrashim say that children heard it in one way, people of a certain temperament heard it in a different way, but it was all the same message. So why would this lead anyone to believing it was coming from different sources? V'oid ve'ikar, and more, and especially, Toichnam shel hadiburim haya anoichi Hashem Elokecha lo yeh lecha elokim acherim. And especially, what were they hearing? They were hearing, don't have more than one deity. Why would that lead them to thinking there's more than one? So that's like the global problem with what Rashi seems to be teaching here. And then the Rebbe says we're going to drill down because each one of these two subsidiary aspects has a problem in and of itself, a more specific problem. The Perish Harishanim move on. When it comes to the first thing that Rashi teaches, what's not understood is Rashi says that Hashem appears here as an elder, a compassionate elder. The Fi Perish Rashi. Now, if you follow everything that Rashi taught, already yesterday on the 5th day of Sivan, and at least a few hours before Hashem started with the Seres HaDibros, Hashem appeared this way. V'imkein, and if so, Tekev be'ez his galusay hayakash baruch hu tzarich lishlol mibnei Yisrael as hatos be'ikrei amuna d'shtei rishreyasein. So Hashem should have been concerned with disabusing Bnei Yisrael of this erroneous idea that there could be more than one God immediately when he appeared in this new persona, as a word. And not to seemingly kind of interrupt the flow of the Seres HaDibros. In other words, it's almost like, imagine you need to make like a housekeeping announcement, something about people closing their phones or, whatever. And you don't make it before, you make it after the lights come on and the background music and the backdrop, and it's the show. And then as part of the show, it seems like you're going to lose your impact by saying, oh, please, everybody close your phones. So that's the problem with the specific problem with the first. Ulafia Perja Sheni. And what's the problem with the second part? Shenesinas hamakim litoy zu ba al yedei hakol shel aseres hadibros. Right? The very possibility that people should make such a mistake comes from the sound through which the Ten Commandments were imparted. Kasha, Rashi atzmai v'hiksha. So it's difficult. Like Rashi himself asks, "V'lama amar lashon yachid elekecha." Why does it taka say? Why, in fact, does it say Elokecha in the singular and not in the plural? V'lama amar lashon yachid Elokecha. Lule perish ze lehesazu kushia. Shari matzinu b'ribim mekaymesh shadibar kadosh baruch hu l'bnei Yisrael b'lashon yachid. If not for this explanation, we actually wouldn't have a question at all. Because we found in a lot of places that Hashem speaks in the singular to drive home that I am your personal God. And especially in the context of Matan Torah, where the whole story opens in the singular. Vayichan, not vayachanu, vayichan. The Jews rested together in the singular. Rashi says, ki ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. But if we're going to explain this, that the voice of Hashem was heard in a way that gave rise to the possibility, the mistaken possibility of thinking that there's more than one God. So here, for sure, it should have been Elokeichem, Anochi Hashem Elokeichem, v'lo lashon yachid, hamaisifa b'nesinas makom l'toah sheloka echad midaber im ish echad v'loka acher im ish acher chalila. If we're worried about this possibility, then over here, for sure, Hashem should have said, Anochi Hashem Elokeichem in the plural. I am all of your gods. It's not like I'm sidelining. I'm having like a private conversation with one person, and all of you guys are hearing something else, which would give rise to saying that Moshe has one God, and Chalila, you have, and you're hearing communication from another. Ubiaru, ubiure, sorry, shel Rashi, and this explanation from Rashi, litain pischam pel Moshe lelamitz and agree b'masa igel, that Hashem did this to give Moshe an opening that he should be able to advocate for and protect the Jews after the Ma'aseh Egel. This seems very far-fetched. Like Mefarshim in fact say, in which way is this helpful? So based on all of the difficulties that we have with this, with what Rashi adds on top of the very first thing he said, Mahu ha'hechrach shel Rashi b'pshutei shel mikra lahaisif ulahavi shnei pirushim elu. Why doesn't Rashi leave well enough alone? Teach us the novelty of what is a min asher tesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. That the novel thing here is to be mishubadim, that this is not a part-time job. It's not even regular enslavement. It's all of us, every moment, every aspect, all the time. But it seems like Rashi is just complicating things and opening up, Pandora boxes and all kinds of problems when we don't need that. But if you remember the first thing that the Rebbe explains that Rashi teaches, then the rest of it flows. Lefi haperish harishon b'Rashi, according to the first thing that Rashi taught, that the word who took you out of Egypt is a different concept from the words, I am God, your God, meaning one is not contingent on the other. One is not the reason for the other. It's two different statements. The problem with that is that we still have that word asher, which is a qualifier. It seems to be saying, Shari Loshen Asher, Meir B'der Klal Al Hemshach. Asher usually connects two clauses. It is a continuation, L'nemar Lefneza. It's a continuation of what is said before. V'loi alai safas davar chadash l'gamri. Asher is most often, conventionally, not used as a segue into a new idea. On the contrary, it's used as a bridge, a connective tissue to connect the two. Therefore, Rashi is compelled to bring the additional perushim, shelefihem, because it's only based on the second, on the additional things that he teaches. Shelefihem misyashiv hitev hemshech lashon hakasuv. Because only by bringing the additional information do we reconcile how this pasuk is reached. And so that Rashi is able to teach us not that I am your God because I took you out of Egypt, but I am the God who took you out of Egypt. Shelafia perish hasheni, valderach zelafia perish hashlishi, perish hakasav hu, anoichi hu asher haitzesicha. I am the God, not because I took you out. I am the God who took you out. Yes, I appeared in different guises, but I'm the same God, Asher, who took you out. Yes, you heard the sounds coming from different directions. It's all the same God, Asher Hoitzesicha, who took you out. And now, in Seif Vav, now that the Rebbe has explained the trajectory of Rashi's commentary, now he comes to give us a hayra that the Rebbe says is nifla'a, is wondrous. Seif Vav, Mesiyuma shall perish Rashi zeh, from the conclusion of Rashi's perish here. The lama amar lashon yachid l'lamet sanagori b'maaseh egel. Why does it appear that Hashem speaks in the singular in order that Moshe should be able to defend Bnei Yisrael? Yesh lilmoid hayra'a nifla'a al goydel chavivusay shel kol Yehudi lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We learn a wondrous lesson about just how dear every Jew is to God, on the tremendous endearment that every Jew has before God. The Rebbe tells us, "Anu aiskim kan biYehudim shaloizu b'vat shaloi niskayim behem tiyu mishabadim li." Who are we talking about with the Egel? We're talking about Jews that not only are they not completely subjugated to God, Elahim hayu nesunim b'ktzei ha'hafri legamri menech Hashem Elokecha. No, they were involved in something that was on the complete opposite of the spectrum. The very opposite of I am God, your God. Avodah Zarah. Ulaman Yehudim ke'elu. But for Jews like this, whose behavior manifests the complete opposite of what Hashem is asking for here, Omer Kadosh Baruch Hu be'eis matan Torah. So Hashem says, within this monumental, most important seismic moment in the history of the world, the history of the Jewish people, within Matan Torah, l'chol ha'daros, and for all generations, the Eibusha says b'lashon yachid. He says Anochi Hashem Elokecha in the singular, kedei sheyiyeh biyad Moshe lelamed sanagoria al Yehudim elu. Why does Hashem do this? In order that Moshe should be able to come to the rescue. He should be able to protect. He should be able to advocate on behalf of these Jews. V'yiser mizu, and even more. Pischon peh, this alibi, as it were, zekaruch, this is intertwined with, it's intersected with ha'yisafa b'nesinas ha'makom litay sheb'shuriyas harbein. This alibi that Hashem wants to extend for these Jews is complicated because it's intersected and intertwined with a greater chance that people should be able to say that there's more than one God. That Moshe had a private conversation with Hashem, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and the rest of the Jews were left to their own devices. Uleidach, and on the other hand, Hasanigoria shebedavar klusha. And on the other hand, the alibi itself is quite weak and tenuous, as the other Mefarshim say. That it's not very convincing. That because Hashem said, "Anochi Hashem Elokecha," oh, right, Taka, really, the Jews didn't realize that God was speaking to all of them. I mean, this is very, very far-fetched, considering that Moshe was told to go to the Jews and prepare them, and they knew that Hashem was appearing to all of them, and so on and so forth, right? So the Rebbe says, look what's happening here. Hashem wants to give protection and to advocate for Jews who went all out against him. This very thing that Hashem is offering creates a greater complication that people should be able to think, Chalila, that there's more than one God. And seemingly, you're grasping at straws here. It's a very tenuous way of advocating. And yet, Ba'afal Pikain, Omer Kadosh Baruch Hu shekedai hu hadavar. Abisha says, it's worth it for me. Shema al yidei zeh yisafsher limud zchus al Yehudi. Look at this. Because perhaps, maybe, this will allow for the possibility of learning zchus on a Jew, of giving grace to another Jew, of being able to be malamed zchus, of giving them the benefit of the doubt. Ve'afilu al Yehudi kazu. And even on a Jew like Chazel, like this kind of Jew, like Rashi says, it wasn't just Avodah Zarah. They were also involved in Giloy Arayos. They were also involved in murder. I mean, this was some cohort. And yet, the Eibishter is ready to go out on a limb, as it were, and use terminology that could further muddy the waters to give an excuse for Moshe how we should be able to protect them. And so how do we answer on this on this claim that this could cause people to make a mistake? So, like it says famously, Chazal say, Ksoiv, right, and whoever wants a mistake will make a mistake. We have this a number of times. And right away at the beginning of the Torah, Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu Kid Moseinu. Like there's a presidium here. We're gonna make man in our image, right? So there's this rule. Chazal taught that there are things in the Torah that Hashem wrote in a certain way, and if you want to use this in a heretical manner, go ahead. Or differently, it says Hashem says, I'm not going to not create stars and the moon and the sun just because some people are going to go and call them deities. And the lesson is self-understood for each one of us. We all have to be involved in bringing every Jew closer. There's no place to have meetings and create a strategy and create metrics and say this Jew, it's worthy of devoting ourselves or our time. But not to the other. Because the Torah completely obviates this possibility, umatgisha, and underscores that immediately in the very first one of the 10 Commandments, Nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu pischam peh limtzoi limatzchus al Yehudi ha'asid li kasher Rachman al-Islan b'ma'isa egel shehu hefech midibor zeh atzmai nech Hashem Elokecha. The Torah is completely throwing out the possibility of saying this Jew is worthy of our time and our efforts and our money, and this one is not, because in the very first dibor of the 10 Commandments, the Torah underscores that Hashem gave Moshe and all of us this alibi, as it were, to treat every Jew with schus, to find a way of understanding them in a meritorious way. Even a Jew who in the future was going to create the Egel, which is the opposite of the first Dibra. Alachas kama v'kama shebidareinu zeh. And how much more so? And that was talking about the Dar HaMidbar, Dar HaDeya. They were great people. How much more so in our generation? Asher boi rubam kikulam shel elu sheyesh lekarvam liyados heim begeder tinaik shenishba leveina aku. And how much more so this lesson is today, where the vast majority of those who need to be brought closer to Judaism fall into the category of an infant taken into captivity by the other nations, taken into captivity of the ignorance that is so rampant among our nation. And therefore, yesh limtzai drachim lahagia el kol echad ve'echad Yisro. So it's upon us, it's on us to find ways to reach each Jew. Val yidei kirav kol b'nei Yisrael avinu shebashamayim, and through bringing closer every Jew to our Father in heaven, ma'amidim anu es hakahol gadol, we are establishing the great the great crowd, the swelling crowd, sheyitzad, that will go forward, lekabel pnei Mashiach tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, who will go forward to greet Mashiach, the righteous Mashiach, may it be speedily in our days, actually, not just words that we're saying, but mamash, mamash, mamash. And there's a shtickle chidush that's embedded in the words here, because very often we talk about no Jew will be left behind, atan to look to echad echad, that in Mitzrayim there were a lot, 4/5 of the Jews stayed in Mitzrayim, only 1/5 left, right? But it's going to be different when Mashiach comes. But here it seems that the Rebbe is saying that all of this will happen even before, that we will do our work, we will bring these Jews closer, and they will be part of the groundswell, the kohol gadol, that will go across Mashiach Tzidkenu. So we definitely have our work cut out for us, but we are definitely seeing an openness and a eagerness today on the part of Jews that we haven't seen prior, and certainly an openness and an eagerness to the teachings of our Rebbe and to the understanding that he is the Nasi Hadar, and just gotta finish up here. Wishing everybody